Here at the Craft Beer Channel, we're on a mission to get UNESCO status for cask ale. In our opinion, the best way to serve beer and a beautiful part of the UK's heritage. We strongly believe that UNESCO recognition will help arrest decades of decline in cask sales. And you can help by drinking some, signing our petition and joining our Patreon. In the meantime, we're releasing some fascinating feature-length documentaries of our favourite cask ale breweries, all filmed while making our award-winning series Keep Cask Alive. This week we're at the legendary Timothy Taylor's in Keighley, Yorkshire, brewers of Landlord, the only beer to have won CAMRA's coveted Champion Beer of Britain 4 times. It's also one of the few cask ale breweries truly thriving today, more than 150 years after it was founded. That's not just down to the delicious beers, though we'll be digging into those later, but the approach they've taken to pricing, branding, and even how they deliver the beer. Taking on the tired cliches that cask ale is cheap, for old guys, and often flat and warm. To learn more, we sat down with CEO Tim Dewey and head brewer Andy Leman.
So Tim, Andy, thanks so much for having us. I guess the best place to start would be the beginning. What's the history of Timothy Taylor's?
Well, the brewery goes back to 1858. It was founded by Timothy Taylor, and he did actually train as a tailor before he got into brewing. We're here on the Knoll Spring site, but he actually started the other side of Keighley on a place called Cook Lane. And about 5 years later, this parcel of land known as Knoll Spring came up for sale, and he moved here. And the reason for moving here is the name, Knoll Spring. We take clean water for granted, but you couldn't take it for granted in the 1800s. So he moved here in 1863, and the brewery's been here ever since, and it's still owned by descendants of the Taylor's family. There was a period where the heart of the business was sort of working men's clubs in the north, and we have this line that doesn't go down very well with people of the opposite sex, for men of the north. But it was this kind of really gritty, traditional working man's drink, mm-hmm. and then that's and brand, and then that's kind of evolved over time. And I've been here now coming up to 10 years, and thanks to the team and people like Andy and our sales director and marketing and everything else, the business has done really well and kind of grown on a whole nother level. So I would say in the last 10 years, we probably would now see ourselves as more of a medium-sized business with a turnover about 30 million pounds, where if you went back 10 years ago, we were around 18 million pound mm-hmm.
turnover business.
I'm absolutely convinced I know what lies behind that. And I think, partly goes to why they hired me. I mean, my background isn't in beer, it's in spirits. And when I got hired by this traditional family brewer, I was a little bit, confused. Why me? And actually then when I joined the business and started to understand a bit about the cask ale market, frankly, I found it quite a slightly insane market in terms of how the industry allowed it to develop, that it was a very price-oriented market, very volume-oriented market, and not necessarily focused on quality. And I can give you a little example of that. It's a short example, and this is something I've framed it here in the boardroom, but I've actually also framed it for my predecessor because I don't think he realized the significance of it. And this, I found this in the files just randomly there, and when I read it, I was like, this is really significant. I think it tells you everything you want to know about why Taylor's is succeeding. I'll have to put my reading glasses on here. So the first is an email from Wetherspoons, and this goes back to 2005, and it's from the buyer. Dear Charles, I've recently conducted a review of all products supplied by Guest Ale breweries across the J.D. Wetherspoon estate. As you should have been made aware when setting up your supply line with us, we have a strict pricing guideline when purchasing Guest Ales. This is up to 4%, ABV, alcohol by volume, £40. Between 4.1 and 4.5, £42. Between 4.6 and 5.44, and above 5.1, £46. Now, I don't know if you realize the significance of that, but that is the very definition of a commodity. In other words, what the buyer's saying there is, we don't care the quality of your raw materials, how good your process is. You know, if you're this alcoholic strength, this is our price. I was global marketing director for Smirnoff Vodka for a period. You know, you wouldn't see them sending that out for vodka, would you? The price for 37.5% vodka is X. You know, you've got things like Grey Goose, Absolute, Smirnoff, or think of what's happened in the gin market. And as I say, I don't blame Wetherspoons. How did the industry let that sort of, you know, thinking, permeate people buying beer, etc.? Now, I'll just read on, make a further point on it. So, of course, what do you think's coming after this? Upon reviewing your account, I have found landlord, which does not fall within our pricing structure. Therefore, we'll be delisting this product from our database, and you should cease supply of this product with immediate effect. And then the killer line, of course, if you wish to renegotiate price and supply, we'd be happy to review again. Now, the reality is, what do most breweries do in this business? I said before, it's a very volume and price-driven market. And so they get a letter like this, God, we can't lose that business. We're going to have to move our price. So they move the price. But about 6 months, 9 months down the road, they realize, well, we're not really making any money at that price, but we're committed to it. So what are we actually going to do? Well, maybe we can buy a slightly cheaper version of the malt, use less hops or whatever. Let's say their existing beer is beer A, they develop cheaper beer B, and the better ones might even do market research. Can the consumer tell the difference? No. So we'll go with beer B. Problem is, same mentality, more time passes, they go to C and beer D. They never research that against A. It's always against the predecessor. So before you know it, the beer goes like this, and the quality gets worse. Now, you might think, this is Tim Dewey, Chief Executive Taylor's, kind of spinning the Taylor's yarn. But let me tell you that one of our non-executive directors worked for Bass Breweries in its heyday, and Andy and I needed some independent advice on the brewery from a technical point of view. And so Martin Thomas, who was their ops director in the heyday of Bass, so he had 9 breweries and a malting reporting to him. He came into the brewery here, and everybody, by the way, so don't feel singled out, has to listen to my little spiel when they come before it's like price of entry to the brewery. So I literally went through my ABCD with him, and he said, Tim, you've just taken me back to the bad old days. He said, because that is what would happen in Bass every year. Every year, knock on the door, we need to save, a penny, a half a penny, and you start out with a great product, and over time, because of this orientation, which really is very different to what I saw in the spirits industry, that happens. Now, you asked me, well, why is Taylor still here and why are we thriving? And by the way, thriving means we've moved from a 2% market share in 2014, that's 1 in every 50 pints, to in the last year, we've accounted for 1 in every 20 pints of cask ale. Now, we've grown, and some of that is also the market declining. But why is it? Well, I think it goes right back to Charles's response to this email. So this was the letter that Charles sent back to Wetherspoons, dated March 2005. Dear X, thank you for your email of 10th of March, and I note that your strict limits on the purchase price of beers prevent you from buying Landlord. The reason why we can't bring Landlord down as cheap as you would like is because it has the best ingredients, approximately twice the price per ton for malt, and nearly 10 times the amount per barrel for the hops. Your guide price is £42 for a 9-gallon at 4.3% ABV, whereas our list price before discount is £71.23. But then this is the best bit. Should you ever wish to reconsider your general policy and stock for quality rather than cheapness, I enclose the product description of all our beers, which also show the prizes they have won in blind tasting. I would like to thank you all for the trade that you have done with us in the past, and look forward to talking to you again should your beer stocking philosophy change. This business, and this precedes me, and thank God Charles and the family before him, we've always put a value on what we do, and we've always said we want to deal with customers that place a value on the quality of what we produce. And if they don't place that value, then we would rather walk away from the business. And it's fair to say that since this exchange, we've had 1 order go into Wetherspoons in all that time since 2005.
So Andy, you've I hope this comes across that way. I think you've been at the brewery. You joined the brewery the same year I was born.
1987?
Yeah. So you've been a part of this heritage, and you've seen that, uncompromising clinging to that quality and those ingredients.
Yeah, I mean,
whole time.
when I started, Lord Ingro was the boss. Alan Hay was the head brewer. He started working at Taylor's in 1939, retired in 96. So there was a lot of history and hand down of the principles of brewing at Timothy Taylor's. Mm-hmm. And as Tim says, the overall thing, and the way Alan Hay put it was, you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. If you want to make good beer, you have to start off with good ingredients, and we do pay a lot more for our barley malt, for example, because it's a heritage variety, Golden Promise, which yields much less per acre, so the farmer doesn't get the yield he would like. So we obviously have to make up the price.
I guess the other sort of perhaps less recognised real benefit of that is that, the beers that we have on this table, they will not, outside of, the variation that was within nature, they won't have really changed much. So they're almost time capsules to 1987 when these beers were being made, whereas other people that have made compromises or just, changed their recipes throughout the years, they don't have that sort of lineage way back that, again, has been passed down through brew sheet and brewer and brewer. What's sort of your philosophy on the beers that Timothy Taylor make and the history of, in particular, Landlord and Bolt Maker?
Yeah, well, I mean, Bolt Maker used to be called Best Bitter, and it was, I think, brewed in the 1940s originally. But when you go back to those sort of times, and we do have the brewing records from those times, going back to the late 20s, we were brewing different styles of beer. Nearly all of them were dark beers, though. And then, of course, the fashion changed. People wanted to have lighter beers. Bitters, as you said, that's when bitter became a sort of established drink. Before that, they would have been called pale ales. And then Landlord, 1953, was a beer developed by Alan Hay and the previous head brewer to him. And really, they had a lot of foresight, because they actually created a very pale beer compared to the other cask beers in the country. So that it started off as a bottled beer, but as a pale ale, and they used as much hops as they could, and some aromatic hops, including some from Slovenia, Savinski Goldings, which give a citrus twist to the beer. And really, there was not another beer like it on the market, really, until the explosion of the new breweries in the 90s, I would say. When I started in 1987, hardly any of our pubs actually sold Landlord. They all sold Golden Best and, as it was, Best Bitter. But it generated a sort of cult status, and then in 1976 it won all sorts of prizes at the Brewers Exhibition, and it won Champion Beer of Britain in the 80s and went on to win it 4 times, and the volume has increased dramatically through the years. When I started in 1987, it was a minor brand for us. We were brewing, it was probably 15% of our volume we brewed, and now it's 80+%. So.
We're literally making a documentary series that is, to some extent, about the future of cask ale and the future of the breweries that brew it, the farmers that supply it, the pubs that serve it. What does the future look like for Timothy Taylor's? Are there going to have to be changes to, not to the beers, but to adding to the range and stuff like that to deal with it? Or do you see a real future for cask to grow and to thrive?
Well, I think we absolutely see a future for cask. I suppose one of the big questions is, how the size of that market. But I don't want to sound like hubristic, but we even sometimes talk about it like in a Guinness context. Does Landlord, and because of the focus we put on cask, does Landlord become the Guinness of cask ale? If you go back in history, all breweries had a stout. Guinness was but one of a number of very high-profile brands, and then over time, because of the focus on Guinness, I'm not sure half the people drinking Guinness today, if you said to them, "Do you like your stout?" might look and you go, what are you talking about? And as a marketing person joining Taylor's, I always say to the team here, I believe people drink brands, not categories. And so the thing I think we can do best to support the cask ale market is build Landlord as a brand. It isn't about building cask first, and by the way, by Landlord, it happens to be a cask ale. It's about, look, drink Landlord. It is this fantastic beer. It's got these characteristics. This is the focus on quality. By the way, it happens to be a cask ale. And I think in doing that, it's our best way of supporting the cask industry. We have 19 salespeople. All of them are cask mark trained because, again, there's no point Andy and the team doing all the focus on quality here at the brewery, and then it gets into the outlet, and it's not treated right, it's not served correctly, etc. So, we always say we're only as good as the weakest link. So I do think cask is here to stay, but equally, one of the reasons we launched Tropical Storm, a kegged ale, is, I've got to be looking forward, I've got to be protecting the brewery, and the view is we need to have a foot in another camp in case our assumptions about what happens with cask, prove more challenged than the reality. It's an extreme example because it was a technical thing rather than a taste change. But think of Kodak and film. I remember you're on holiday and you go into these shops and they'd have those big sort of display cabinets behind with all the different films. Gone. Now, as I say, I don't think that's the right analogy because that was a technical change, but taste can change, and therefore we absolutely are fighting for Landlord, fighting for our cask beers and doing our utmost to support the category. But at the same time, we have to fight for our survival as well, and that's why having a kegged ale just gives us a foot in another camp to kind of hedge our bets, if nothing else.
So we've learned how the business side of Timothy Taylor's has brought its success against all the odds, but that's only possible because of the beautiful and unique beer it produces. Landlord is one of my favourite ales, combining a kind of golden raisin malt sweetness with lots of honey, spice and lemon from the hops. It feels like a super modern cask ale, so it's incredible to think that the beer is over 70 years old, and that it's made using processes and ingredients that go back even further, starting with Golden Promise.
It was originally bred as a distilling variety, grown in Scotland. In fact, if it weren't for Macallan, probably the variety would have disappeared because they moved off Golden Promise. This was probably in the early 1990s to a new variety, and they found the spirit coming off the stills tasted different. So they actually went and contracted directly with farmers to start growing Golden Promise again, which meant the seed kept being propagated. It meant because they wanted high nitrogen barley, we wanted low nitrogen, there was always some of the crop for us, so it kept it going.
Yeah, I've seen it used a little bit in New England IPA beers as well, because it has this kind of very, I guess, residually sweet, kind of juicy almost character to it.
Yeah, that's what we always say. And through the years we've trialled many, many different varieties when people have said this could be the new Golden Promise.
Right.
We've never found one that has got the same juicy maltiness in the beer. Some have been very good, but not quite a match for Golden Promise. I know we ought to pour some in your hand. And
Yeah. Is it fresh enough to taste, or has it been in that jar for a while?
No, we're supposed to replace it on a regular basis, so let's see what it tastes like.
See if they have.
Yeah, still crunchy.
Weetabixy is actually where that sort of takes me, like a nice kind of sweet wheatiness.
Yeah, it is a sweet barley.
Yeah.
When you see it that's the malted form. When you see it in the barley form, when the maltsters will bring us samples of barley cut just off the harvest, it does have a real golden tinge to the barley. It's a beautiful looking barley, beautiful looking barley.
So this is a very full mash tun. Is this Landlord that's going
Yes,
through?
it's Landlord.
Like when we arrived and we got out of the car in Keighley, you were just hit by this wonderful sort of Horlicksy malt aroma that just, I guess comes from 11 tons of mashing every day. It must be
Yeah.
part of the signature of the town at this point.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah.
So it's 100% Golden Promise, but you add sugar to your beers.
Yeah, we do a small amount of sugar. It's
So
only
what's
about
the-
5 to 7%.
What's the purpose of that? Is that to help it be
Well,
drier? Or?
I mean, the original purpose, really, people added sugar to beer was because it extended your mash tun, so you could brew more beer out of a smaller mash tun.
Yeah.
But we still use it because of two things, really. We think it gives a drinkability to the beer. You know, malt is quite a heavy sort of flavour.
Yeah.
The other reason we add the sugars is because our yeast, which we'll come on to, but our yeast strain, which we've been using for 44 years, is accustomed to that spectrum of sugars in the wort, so we don't want to change that.
So it's used to have that very easy, quick to ferment stuff to
Yeah,
kick it off, and then it.
especially when you're using open fermenters,
Right.
the invert sugar, the yeast can utilise that straight away
Yeah.
and start generating carbon dioxide, which then will kill any aerobic infecting bacteria that might be in the air or might be on the air above the beer. So it's important to get off to a quick fermentation.
So it's amazing how pretty much every cask brewery in particular we visit, people that have had recipes and processes for a long time, you could learn how to brew from a manual. That's to some extent how I did it, but most of it was through word of mouth, talking to people like yourself. And it feels like somebody who's read a manual and came to Timothy Taylor's would really struggle to produce those beers because of that knowledge that you have just imparted there about what your particular yeast needs.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
very specific to you.
yes, you can write procedures and things to show people, to make people are doing things the right way, at the right times, and the right cleaning processes the right way, with the right percentage chemicals and stuff. But that's the part of the story. That's what enables you to keep consistency. But to really have the quality of the beer is a lot more than just following what's written down.
Yeah.
Golden Promise tastes unique enough in itself, but its so-called juicy character also makes it the perfect choice for the equally unusual hop variety the brewery chose to add in absurd quantities.
So we are absolutely surrounded by hops. I've never really seen anything quite like it, and I'm kind of amazed it's still, a manual job for somebody to add. I see this in like the great big traditional sort of lager breweries of the Czech Republic, but in the UK, there's been a big switch towards pellets and extracts.
Yeah, we believe the hops we're using in our beers, including Landlord, we're using heritage varieties. We're using Fuggles and Goldings that have been around for hundreds of years. And when they're bred, they weren't bred to have strong flavours. They were just, their flavours are very delicate. And for those types of hops, I believe that the pelletizing process, which is known to remove aroma from hops, you lose all that delicacy of those heritage hops.
Yeah.
So while the pelletizing process works perfectly well for, American grown Cascade
Super oil rich
or
and
Centennial or something, because there's so much there, if you lose a bit of the aroma and flavour, it doesn't really matter. But with these delicate hops, there's not much there to start off with, and so to preserve that fragrance, you need to use whole hops.
Yeah. So what varieties go into Landlord?
Landlord, so you've got Fuggles and Goldings, and Goldings we use sometimes Whitbread Golding variety, and then we use Savinsky Goldings as well.
So that's
From
Slovenia.
Slovenia. Yeah.
So how did that strange connect? Did that happen in 1953 or was it later?
Yeah. It was
Right, wow, so how did
right
that come
from
about, do you know?
1953. The recipe stayed the same. Well, it was a hop that was used by British brewers in a limited way. Savinsky Goldings, Styrian Goldings, as they were sort of called back then.
Yeah.
Only people really know the story of the Savinsky Golding, where it came from. Mr. Fuggle grew a seedling that in his garden appeared, which was produced nice hop cones, and he called it Fuggles Goldings. Goldings was a renowned hop, and even in Europe they wanted Goldings. So he sold some of his Fuggles Goldings plants to the Slovenian growers, they thought they were buying Goldings, but actually they were buying Foggles. So the Savinsky Golding is genetically identical to the Foggle. That's the thing, isn't it? As the French talk about terroir, the Savinsky Golding is a Foggle that is grown in Slovenia and has quite different characteristics to the Foggle grown in Herefordshire and Kent.
So I've never rubbed a Slovenian Golding.
Yeah, we can do
get
some,
to have a little check of the aroma? I'd love to do
there's some down here actually.
Okay.
So you can see they're nice green hop.
Yeah, beautiful colours.
They're a funny hop because what they give to the beer is a citrusy flavour.
Yeah.
But you don't always get that on the nose.
Yeah, it's much more kind of rounded and, I mean, almost like,
It's
almost
very
peachy.
delicate. Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's fruity and sometimes it's a bit tea-like as well.
Yeah. Yeah, if you served me a tea that smelled like that, I feel like it was going to do me a lot of good.
Well, we could try. So they are quite oily, but very low alpha. So these will only be about 2% alpha.
So yeah, you can really layer up that huge bit of aroma without having to worry about overbalancing the beer.
Business, yeah.
After being well and truly hopped, the beer is transferred to the brewery's deep square fermenters. The shape, size and open tops of which are all fundamental to the flavour of the beer, catering to the way that the house strain of yeast has adapted over decades.
It's absolutely incredible to think that the yeast has done that in, was this the first or the second batch of the day yesterday?
This was first batch yesterday.
Yeah, it's volatile. That sort of shaggy carpet is moving constantly.
Yeah. It's a very vigorous fermentation.
Yeah.
Fermentation takes 3 days, 3 to 4 days. So we skim the yeast off the top. Then we put the cooling on full and it'll take another 3 to 4 days to cool down. So it's a 7-day cycle. The main thing about our fermentations is they're open fermentations. It encourages the yeast to flocculate onto the top of the vessel rather than sink to the bottom. And by doing that, there's so many organic pathways going on during fermentation, it's inevitable you will get flavour differences.
Yeah.
The size and shape of your vessel is important, the way the yeast ferments. So all our vessels, apart from 2, which we use for smaller batches of beer, are the same dimensions, same length, same width and same depth.
After a long day filming beer and standing next to exceptionally hot vessels, it was definitely time for a drink. So we decamped to the closest thing that Timmy's has to a tap room, a pub in the centre of Keighley called Taylor's on the Green. There, Brad got behind the bar with Andy to learn about the history of the sparkler and how it makes that signature creamy head beloved of the North and perfect for landlord.
So process is key, is paramount, it's all important. But I've got to talk about the elephant in the room. We're up north now. I'm a southerner, and I'm not sure where I stand on this debate. But you guys up here, you like sparklers?
Yeah, we do.
What is a sparkler?
Well, first of all, I have to admit, I'm originally a southerner. I grew up drinking Wadworth 6X, which was always as flat as a mill pond.
Yeah.
Brimful in a handle glass usually. And it works differently for different beers. So southern English beers from traditional breweries tend to be very delicate hop flavours. And where in the north the beers do tend to be a bit more bitter, a bit more robust. And if you put a southern beer through a sparkler, I think it ruins it because you lose a lot of the flavour out the beer.
Right.
Because the effect of the sparkler, which is what we use in the north, is to agitate the beer, and some of those delicate aromatics will just disappear out the top of the glass.
Yeah, it's almost like a sort of sprinkler in the way that it kind of pushes
It is,
the beer.
yeah. Some people call them sprinklers, some sparklers.
Yeah.
I call these sparklers because that's what they always were to me.
Yeah.
And sprinklers, the one where you sprinkle onto the top of the beer, which does happen in London and down south, where they have a device on the end which does do that, has that effect.
This little bit of plastic has caused so much consternation between the north and the south. It's unbelievable. Yeah. I think we're really at odds about it, but it makes so much sense. Now you said about the southern beers maybe being a little more subtle with the flavours and maybe lose some of that aromatic stuff when it gets falls through a sparkler.
So our beers we taste them in the sample room without going through a hand pump, I think, because we're looking for differences, close differences between things, without the effect of a hand pump. But it tastes quite harsh in our sample room. However, when you pull it through the sparkler, it slightly softens the beer.
Right.
And that's what I mean about it's brewed to be served that way because it needs the softening effect of the sparkler on the hand pump.
So it's amazing. I mean, like cask ale is amazing anyway because it's alive. It's the fresh bread of beer, and it hasn't finished its journey till it comes through the beer engine.
That's
but
right, yeah.
even so, like considering all of that, the cellaring, everything that's happening below us, that little bit of plastic there, you're brewing your recipes for that.
Yes,
ultimately.
Yeah, ultimately, that's the last bit it goes
Last
through.
port of
It
call.
gets in the glass.
Yeah. I love it.
These type of sparkler, I believe, was developed. There's a guy who's from Keithley, Colin Farrer. He developed the quarter pint pull first of all. So
Right.
before that, they were all half pint pulls. And he developed the swan neck so that the glass goes to the bottom of the swan neck goes to the bottom
All
of the
the
glass.
way to the bottom,
all
isn't
the way
it?
to
Yeah.
the bottom of the glass. And traditionally, the way they created the creamy head on beer here was by using Autovacs, which is a recirculating device below the bar. And we're trying to get away from that because these days, with the throughputs you have on casks, it's difficult to maintain the beer in top condition with that system. So what this does is it's another way of generating that creamy head without using an autovac.
Amazing. Andy, whichever side of the debate you're on, there's undoubtedly there's one thing that a sparkler does, which is that beautiful creamy head and that wonderful cascading pour. It's absolute theatre on a bar.
It is. I was going to say that it's the theatre of serving it, and it does really entice people to drink the beer, I think, when you see that.
It's almost like a sort of Guinness effect, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like you've got the quarter pours to kind of let it kind of settle out, and all that beautiful cascading, a perfect pour of Boltmaker. Can you help us with that? I'd love to see you do it.
I'll do my best.
Brilliant.
So, as we say, we've got the swan neck here, so the bottom of the glass goes right
All the way
onto
to the bottom.
sparkler.
Yep.
And then we start pulling, so 4 pulls for a pint. And as you'll see, I'll do it as quickly as possible so that you can see the...
Creates like a whirlpool
Cascade.
effect, doesn't it? As well as the cascade as it's
And it
going
has-
around, it's really churning
It really
it.
does, and that's what creates the lovely
Look at that.
creamy head on the beer.
Doesn't get much better than that, I tell you.
So then we leave that to settle on the bar, and people can see how great that looks.
Yes.
It entices them. They think it's going to be a great beer before they've even tasted it. So.
It's creamy, it's soft, it's inviting. The North's warm embrace, I feel it, Andy, I really do. I'm absolutely convinced, mate.
So Brad's now Team Sparkler and we're Team Yorkshire. It's hard not to fall completely in love with this part of the UK. The people are tirelessly friendly, the views are second to none, the pubs and breweries are historic and beautiful, and the beer is about as good as beer gets. You can see why Timmy's is flourishing, but that just makes it even harder to see why cask as a whole isn't. So we sat down for a pint to try and work out why and what can be done.
Johnny, I feel like an honorary Northerner. They've made us feel so welcome.
I'm not sure you get to decide that, but I'm glad you do.
We'll ask the crowd in a minute. But honestly, this is what an incredible place Yorkshire is. It's so beautiful, right? There's so much pride here. Pride in where you're from, pride in what you do, where you work at the brewery, pride in the ingredients that are going into the beers they make. You can taste the integrity. Like, they're not a race to the bottom, they're racing to the top.
You can see the ones that haven't compromised. As cask ale has started to decline, has struggled as other sectors and as pubs struggled during COVID and stuff like that. Some breweries would start selling their beer cheaper, start chipping away at the cost of those beers.
Yeah.
You can see the breweries that haven't. They've been there long enough and they've never compromised and they stand out now. And it's people with a slightly longer term, I guess, look
That's
at
it.
the world that can see, if we compromise now when the timing's good,
Yeah.
we're suddenly not going to be the best brand, the best beer anymore.
And that's the other thing I'd note as well. It's like Landlord, Timmy's, Timothy Taylor, they're all incredible brands, I think. And that is because anyone who's drinking it has probably consistently had a good pint throughout their drinking experience, right? Because I think they care that much. Cold chaining the beers around the UK in special vans that they own. Who else does that? I mean, that's chef's kiss. Beautiful attention to detail.
It was, brand is seen as a kind of dirty word in craft beer, but they really care about that. And it was interesting when Tim was talking about the idea that, if cask ale does sort of disappear, they'd want to be the Guinness. Porter, stout disappeared, but Guinness carried on. So, if it gets to the point where they are like, everybody else has sadly gone, but you can still have a pint of Timmy's rather than looking along the cask line, That's the long-term look they're looking at. And they're championing cask as a category the whole time.
They are.
But the other thing that was interesting is the fact that, Michael Jackson, I think it was off camera, Andy was saying that he had a beer with Michael Jackson, and Michael Jackson wrote about this, and he said that when he's asked to describe what Landlord tastes like, he said liquid hops, which, in 2024 is a remarkable statement because, people would refer to this as a very malt-forward beer, really. But when we witnessed how many hops went in, those holdings, bucket after bucket, it got to the point where you couldn't see the beer underneath in the copper.
It was amazing.
This is a heavily, heavily hopped beer. It may have low alpha, it may have, fewer essential oils, but that does not mean it's under hopped. It's adding a mellow, soft, fruity, nettle kind of character to this beer that really helps that drinkability and also just feels right for this, calm and tranquil and beautiful and historic and natural part of it. As you can tell, Brad and I have both fallen in love with this part of Yorkshire, for sure. And also more and more with these beers. And as we've learned and why we think this channel works, is because when you find out the stories behind the beer, sometimes the beer gets more delicious.
It's more special and we need to save it.
Yeah.
Not that they're in trouble, because we've seen the books.
Timmy's are okay, but
Timmy's are okay.
Yeah.
But these guys stand out amongst the crowd as real smart cookies, I think, and real innovators in that they've realised you don't need to compromise, right?
Yeah. And I think cask ale's had a bit of a crisis of conscience. Crisis of confidence.
Yeah, that's
in that regard. They've undersold themselves, underpriced themselves, underbrewed in terms of the quality of the ingredients and the amount of ingredients literally going in, and the breweries that haven't done that have ended up prospering. I've gained so much respect and so much love for Timothy Taylor's and Landlord off the back of this video that I can't even truly express it properly. But I am a convert to both Timmy's and to Yorkshire as a whole. I hope Yorkshire likes us as much as we now like it.
I'll drink to that.
Cheers.
This episode was shot as part of our Keep Cask Alive documentary series. You can watch the 7 original fascinating episodes at the link at the end of this video. But before you do, please consider signing our petition on the UK government website and joining our Patreon so we can keep putting together videos and campaigns just like this.